Daily Faceoff's list of top 30 trade candidates rounds out with Canucks superstar Elias Pettersson and the stipulation should they choose to keep JT Miller. And we take a look at the top 4 trade destinations should the Canucks actually trade Pettersson before the trade deadline. We're going to be breaking down all that in this episode of Canucks Digest, but first make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss any and all updates surrounding the Canucks as we head closer and closer to what should be a very exciting trade deadline or a very anxious one for many fans. And with that, let's hop into the first topic of the day, which is Daily Faceoff's Pettersson speculation. So in a list of the top 30 trade candidates, of course, JT Miller was at the top of it. We're going to be talking about that in a later video. We've been talking about him a lot lately. So we're going to shift it to Elias Pettersson, where he was at number 30 is very indicative of the very first point where it says the longer Miller's on the roster, the more they may be forced to pivot towards having those conversations about him again. A few weeks ago or a few months ago, Pettersson would probably have been in the top 10 on this list. But with how he has been playing lately, especially scoring a goal the other night and having a lot more progression more than JT Miller has, and with the conversation shifting towards Miller, it seems likely that he's going to be the one who stays and has expressed staying. Talks were much more robust than with Miller, however, but it's not impossible he gets traded. The no movement clause starts on July 1st when free agency opens in the offseason. Hopefully, if they do move on from Pettersson, it's not until that no movement clause because you still want to try and push for something to try and salvage this season. It's been a very tumultuous season for the Canucks. However, there is still hope. They're just outside of that wild card spot. But it seems like a move is very much imminent. However, it seems very likely that JT Miller will be the player that gets moved instead of Elias Pettersson. However, there is still a lot of speculation that the Canucks will ultimately try and ride it out with Miller and move on from Pettersson just based on what they can get for it. And we've seen and talked about all the things that Vancouver could be getting in exchange for JT Miller and how they're really getting lowballed by a lot of teams for a superstar on their team, one of the top 4 players on their team, and they're getting a bucket of pucks for him basically in all these trade talks that we've been covering. So someone that could bring a lot more value, even though fans may not like it as much or the players may not like it as much, or it might be more detrimental as far as losing a superstar, you might be able to get a bit more of an actual return on Elias Pettersson than JT Miller. But what do you guys think about that in general down below as far as Daily Faceoff's ranking of Pettersson? But that's going to take us into our second topic of the day, which is the 4 Pettersson locations that he could potentially go to. The first one, this is coming from an article that Sportsnet covered a few weeks back, around January 9th or 10th. But the first one they talked about was the Carolina Hurricanes. This is an easy one because there was smoke here last winter before Pettersson inked his extension. The Athletic has reported the Canucks want an apples for apples trade, whether they're talking about Pettersson or the teammate he reportedly isn't vibing with, JT Miller. Unfortunately for Vancouver, the only high-end under contract centers known to be on the market both play in Vancouver and can't afford to be traded for each other. Chances are any return isn't going to be a completely clean fit for Vancouver in terms of getting a player of comparable ability to Pettersson, who's around the same age and plays around the same premier position. Carolina, for instance, obviously isn't swapping Sebastian Aho for Pettersson because, among other reasons, that defeats the purpose of adding Pettersson to a group you want to strengthen. Maybe the conversation focuses around a centerpiece such as 22-year-old set winger Seth Jarvis or KHL defenseman Alexander Nikishin, who is expected to be in North America as soon as the season, end of this season, and might be a top 4 stud immediately. Right there, Seth Jarvis, that's the one that you try and go for if this trade with the Hurricanes pans out, because he is an absolute superstar. He's a Winnipeg guy. I know the Jets would love to have him on their team, so if we're able to kind of poach him from the Carolina Hurricanes, I know we're giving up our biggest superstar in Elias Pettersson for him, but looking at what Seth Jarvis has been doing in Carolina, the energy that he would bring to this Canucks locker room and to this team and to this city, really, they would kind of adopt a new kind of persona under him and kind of have a different kind of face of the franchise, one that's a bit more outspoken, one that's a bit more likable in the media. Not saying PD isn't likable, but when speaking to the media, Seth Jarvis tends to give them a little bit more to chew on or a little bit more flair or personality to go with it, and he would bring a lot to this team. However, that's a big move to make, and that's giving up Elias Pettersson, who was a 100-point goal scorer 2 seasons ago, was nearly at 100 points last season. Again, he's been struggling again this year, but he's been getting it better each game and seeming to improve. We saw a classic PD snipe the other night when he scored in that game. And with Seth Jarvis, though, I do really like that. As far as all the trade options that we're going to look at with Pettersson, I think Seth Jarvis is the one that most intrigues me just because of the talent that he has is undeniable. what he means to a locker room and the energy he brings to a locker room is great. The morale boost that he has and what fans would really embrace about him, I think, is really interesting. But what do you guys think about Seth Jarvis? And that's going to go into the second team we're going to look at, which is the Buffalo Sabres. This is another no-brainer in part because Sportsnet Elliot Friedman already melted minds earlier this season when he spitballed about the Sabres sending Dylan Cousins and Bo Byram to Vancouver for Pettersson, which was a ridiculous offer. Buffalo definitely ticks a lot of boxes in that it's an Eastern Conference club. You have to think, given its druthers, Vancouver would prefer to send Pettersson a few time zones away with some intriguing young pieces at both forward and defense. Buffalo is also sufficiently motivated to do something major as it scuffles through another frustrating season in Western New York. Now, a few weeks ago or a few months ago when Elliot was covering that, we said how ridiculous of an idea that was for the Canucks to make that trade. And that was at a time when the Canucks were really desperate to kind of make a trade because all that JT Miller and Pettersson drama was really kind of spewing over to a point where we thought there was no salvation. However, things have kind of corrected themselves a little bit. Elliot Friedman getting suspended was a big result of that as well, where he couldn't just speak on the matter and say ridiculous things like that. But the Buffalo Sabres is a fairly intriguing one, but they blew us out. They beat us the other night. They didn't blow us out, but it seemed like a blowout with the way that we were playing with just dump and chase hockey, giving up face-off draws that led to goals. So things like that against a team like Buffalo. You put Pettersson on that team with Rasmus Dahlin, that might be a little bit scary if you're an Eastern Conference team. Thankfully, if the Canucks do make that move, they don't have to play them as much. So that's something to be at least optimistic about or look forward to if that is the case. However, I think Buffalo, you avoid trading with them at all costs. It's one of those things where you don't want to trade with a bottom-feeding team unless they have a really valuable piece, because you're not really going to be able to get much for a superstar. And you're not going to be able to trade with one of the top teams because they're not going to want to give up one of their superstars for one of your superstars when you're both trying to make a playoff or cup run. So then you find those middle-of-the-ground teams where that's where deals get a little bit interesting and you can find a little bit of hidden sneaky deals, but I don't think Buffalo is one of those teams. But what do you guys think on the Buffalo Sabres as we head into the third team, which is the Anaheim Ducks? On one hand, the Canucks would prefer to move Pettersson east. Surely they don't love the idea of him playing for a division rival that is technically kind of fighting for one of the same wildcard spots Vancouver is seeking. Like we just said, you don't want to send him to a team like that. That said, you ultimately have to take the best deal, and the Ducks might be able to offer that. Mason McTavish has not popped offensively the way Anaheim likely hoped for by year 3, and with Leo Carlsson already in the NHL and the 2024 third overall pick Beckett Sinecki in the pipeline, maybe the Ducks would consider moving McTavish for a proven entity and more pure offensive ability who is still young. A Swedish 1-2 Pettersson and Carlsson down the middle for the next 7 or 8 years sounds pretty great for the Ducks. Who knows, maybe the teams could get on the roll and put together a blockbuster that also involves Trevor Zegras, who has seemed destined to play somewhere other than Anaheim for going on 2 years. Zegras, that one is the one that's kind of appealing if you are trading with the Ducks. But the scary thing is, like I just said, you don't want to trade with a team that's also fighting for a playoff spot or trying to go on a cup run. Anaheim could be one of those teams where they try and build momentum and try and do that, especially through a Pacific Division where we're going to see a lot of them. We don't want to see Pettersson on the other side of the ice if we have to, especially not more than once or twice a season. With Anaheim, you're at risk of doing that immensely. Even if you get Trevor Zegras, I don't know if that is entirely the right move to make. But again, this is coming from somebody where I'm on the camp of don't move Pettersson at all. This is just talking of if we are moving Pettersson, these are the 4 teams where he likely would be going and what we just think on them. I still think if you are moving him, Carolina is still the best one just because of what you can get in return for him. But that's going to take us into the fourth and final team that we're going to look at on this list, and that is the Minnesota Wild. The Wild have long needed a number 1 center to help drive their offense, and just when it seems like they have one developing in-house with Marco Rossi's name has been in trade rumors this season, just like Pettersson's. Rossi's playing in the past month or so, 13 points in 12 games, though 8 came during a 3-game heater, will likely quiet the chatter about the 23-year-old playing anywhere other than the state of hockey. But if GM Bill Guerin doesn't think he's spending he and the pending RFA are in the same universe when it comes to the second contract, there's a player Pettersson's ilk and age out there that could make moving a great young piece like Rossi palatable. And I think with Minnesota, this would be maybe the second most appealing team of the 4 teams we looked at. If we were to rank the 4 teams we're looking at, I'd say Carolina, Minnesota, Buffalo, then Anaheim. But Buffalo and Anaheim are really tied for just the bottom of it. Maybe Anaheim takes the edge over Buffalo in the end just because Trevor Zegras would be a better return than anyone Buffalo has to offer. but Minnesota does look like a decent one there in what you could get for him. Rossi had a bit of a resurgence lately over the past few games, had a little bit of a heater there. Maybe that could be a little bit of recency bias, who knows. But Minnesota, that's another team that you wouldn't have to play too much if Pettersson is dealt there. However, this is also, like I said, this is coming from somebody where I don't think you move Pettersson in this instance. If it's somebody you move, as much as I love JT Miller, I think that's the one that you move on from. But I think with this, it does offer a little bit of insight or a little bit of an idea of what Canucks fans could see if Pettersson jumps into those trade talks again or those trade rumors again, and they choose to stay with JT Miller. But what do you guys think down in the comments below? I know a lot of you guys are divided on who you would rather pick over JT Miller or Elias Pettersson to keep. But of these four teams and what we could get for them, which team jumps out as the most appealing to you? Let us know what you guys think down in the comments. Hit a like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you don't miss new updates when they drop. We have a JT Miller video coming out later today or tomorrow morning, so stay tuned for that. You don't want to miss it. But with that, I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.